Hello everyone, this is LaToya of Infinitenature and I am back with a new video. So today is another book review and it is on Embracing the Inner Critic. Yes, this book is so awesome. It is by House Stone and Sidra Stone. It's turning your self-criticism into creative assets. This is a powerful book. And what inspired me to read this book is I was talking to my life coach and I was discussing something in particular. I don't recall exactly what it was, but she mentioned about the inner critic and she mentioned about reading a certain book. And in that book, it referenced this book. So I was like, let me go on Amazon real quick and just go ahead and buy this and read it. So that's what I did. And it made me realize how my perfection is, how I'm such a perfectionist. And this really was eye-opening for me. One thing that I can take away from this book in particular is that your inner critic was there since the beginning. And a lot of times your inner critic is the voices of authority figures in your life, or your parents. That's normally where it starts, or family, friends. It could be different types of people, but normally you may hear the voice of your parents or some authority figures in your life, particularly in your childhood. And this book really supported me in being able to connect more with my inner child, and it made me realize that your inner critic is can be an ally. The key is to recognize the voice of your inner critic, and the key is to be able to understand that it's a voice. It's a part of you. It's a part of you. We have different parts of ourselves. It's a part of you, but it's still just a voice. It's not the true essence of who you are at your core, but it is here to guide you. And a lot of times what our inner critic does when we are not aware of it is that it talks negatively to us. It talks harshly to us. It is violent to us. It is when your inner critic is not checked, it will tell you to not do this or to not trust this person, or or whatever you do, it's not going to be right. Or it's the part of you that will be like, you could do a great job on something, have an amazing experience with something, and your inner critic will still find a way to point something out. So this book was very interactive. They do have questions that you answer, and little different activities to do with yourself or whatever, just so that you can get acquainted with your inner critic, recognize who your inner critic is, being able to identify, understand why your inner critic is the way it is, and then be able to utilize your inner critic in a way that will support you to be creative. Because when our inner critic is unchecked, it causes us to not really take risk. It causes us to not really tap into our inner critic. I mean, our creativity, not inner critic. Tap into our creativity in the way that we are designed to do. So this book was very insightful, and it also supported me in being able to connect more with my inner child. Because really, what your inner critic is doing is you're underneath the criticism is your anxiety. Is the anxiety, is the fear. So the key is to talk to the inner critic and connect with the inner critic and see, what is it that you're afraid of? What is it that you're concerned with? Because your inner critic is concerned with how you will look, how people will treat you if you do a certain thing, what people think. And one of the powerful things that I remember reading in this book, and I'm paraphrasing, is, what would you do if people didn't care? Like, what would you do if people didn't care? Like, looking at it from that perspective and just remembering that people are not paying attention to us or thinking about us in the way that we really think. It's just that our inner critic is just on overdrive, right? So this book has been very insightful, and I'm looking down because I've wrote notes while I was reading the book that I didn't want to forget about. It talked about the inner critic as the abuser, because the inner critic is very violent. and with words. And just imagine some of the things that you may be looking in the mirror at yourself, and then you may be pointing out every little thing that you consider an imperfection to you. To me, that is being abusive to yourself. Pointing out every little thing and talking about how horrible you are and how you're not worthy of anything. Like, it's just, your inner critic just goes into overdrive sometimes when it's not checked at all. So that was one of the big things that stood out to me. And I'm trying to I'm looking down because I want to go to the chapter that talks about that, because that really stood out to me. I wrote it down for a reason. So I'm just, bear with me one moment while I look at it. So look at it really quick. Let's see. Let me see if I starred anything, because when I star stuff, that means that it really stood out to me. Wow. The inner critic, in a way, is like, if it's not checked, it can be like abusing your inner child in a lot of ways. This is crazy. Now I'm thinking about it. I'm gonna just read a portion of it. Once you become aware of the inner critic as a child abuser, you can move in and treat it in such the same way that you break the outer cycle of child abuse. The inner critic learned how to parent you by listening to your own parents. If they were abusive, it repeats their abuse for your own good. It acts just like a real parent who abuses the child because the parent herself or himself has been the victim of abuse. The key to breaking the inner critic cycle of abuse is to separate from the critic's voice. As you separate from your inner critic, you will be able to take over the role of parent to your inner child. Up until now, the inner critic has been the parent to the inner child. It has been an abusive parent because that is the only way it knew how to behave. Oddly enough, you can become a parent to the inner critic as well, because you are in a position to deal with the underlying anxiety of the inner critic and to stop the critic from its endless abusive chatter. So it's just like a voice in your head, and you think it's you, and it's really your inner critic just talking, or whatever. And it was very insightful for me, because when I was reading the Sacred Contracts, and I have like a pretty much it's like a low-key a series, a book review series on the Sacred Contract, and that book is very powerful for me. It involves a lot of shadow work, and one of the things that I was focusing on and reflecting on is my inner child and how disconnected I was to it. And as I'm beginning to learn more about myself and to, read books and to just, just connect with and reflect on my growth, I'm able to recognize that part of the reason why my inner child, I didn't feel as connected to my inner child, is because of my inner critic. My inner critic just like snuffed my inner child. And when I think of a child or an inner child, I think of playfulness, I think of imagination, I think of being fearless, being just thinking that anything is possible when I think of the inner child. And for whatever reason, I just was like, wow, my inner child had been hiding. It's been hiding because my inner critic took over. Because your inner critic for me, the inner critic was there to protect me from doing things wrong, from making anybody mad, from making sure that people liked me and things of that nature, putting others before myself. So the inner critic is never satisfied. It's something that you have to understand. It's never satisfied. So the key is to recognize the voice of your inner critic. The key is to talk to the inner critic, or do whatever you need to do to get underneath this, figure out where is that anxiety coming from. It makes me understand why I can be anxious sometimes. Like, I have an anxious energy about me in general. So it made me understand why I have such an anxious nature to me. So the key is to dig deep, because really the inner critic is just afraid, is scared of something. It's afraid that something's going to happen to you. You know what I'm saying? So the key is to figure out what it is and talk to it like a child and figure out, okay, what is it that you need? What is it that I need? What is it that I need to calm me down a little bit? And then that's where you are able to as they say in this book, dance with your inner child, our inner critic. It's to me, this book really is supportive in being able to govern your inner critic and your inner child. And so that LaToya, the adult, is in control of the situation, and that I govern my inner critic and inner child and allow them to be allies for me to be able to create the life that I desire and to do the things that I am meant to do in this lifetime. So that's what was very powerful about that, about reading The Abuser. Another thing that really stood out to me was, I have it written here, The Killer Critic. Oh, that was a powerful one, because in that one, it talks about the vicious way that the critic can have you feeling like your life ain't worth living. And to me, that's real. I feel like things like this need to be discussed, because there are so many people who are depressed, so many people that feel like they don't have support or feel like they are not loved. And this right here, if we all learned about things like this, we would be able and learn how to properly handle these type of situations with support around us. In particular, I feel like people wouldn't feel so like life is hopeless and things of that nature or whatnot. It's very insightful. I'm trying to think. I want to read a part of this. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can find. Here it is. I'll read this part. Hopefully this is something that relates to it. Because I normally, at first, I thought I starred something, but I didn't. But severe depression frequently accompanies a killer critic. A person being attacked by a killer critic is often unable to deal with people, work, and life in general. Relationships suffer profoundly because we cannot relate to others when this level of attack is going on within us much of the time. Therefore, support groups can be very important when a killer critic is operating, because people tend to feel isolated, and those groups provide the human contact that is so necessary. When a killer critic is operating, appropriate therapeutic help and possibly antidepressant medication may well be indicated. And to me, that is like, it just reminded me, reading this reminded me of the critic attack that they talk about in this book, about critic attacks, where you may be having an upset about something, or you're judging yourself like crazy, and you're in your mind, you're just talking, you hear in your mind all these negative things, all these negative thoughts about yourself just coming at you or whatever. And that's what they talk about when they said the being attacked by the killer critic. And the key is, they talk about it in this book. I'm not going to go into details, but they give you support on how to, get that critic attack under control, and to get to the root cause of it, and what you need in order to, calm the anxiety down and things of that nature. But this is a very powerful book. And there's another one here. I'm looking down at my notes. Men and women, the relationships between men and women, and how the critic is different with men and with women, and the patriarchal critic and the matriarchal critic. Oh, that was very interesting, especially in today's time, when you hear people talking about toxic masculinity and feminists and all of this stuff. But the key is that you have to remember, that was very eye-opening, because we have to remember that we all have masculine and feminine energy. And and I'm speaking as a woman, just as, it can be frustrating sometimes being a woman and dealing with the experiences that come with that when it comes in relations to men, and how we live in a very patriarchal society here in the US. I'm just talking from my personal experience, and how that can be very frustrating. But also, we have to understand that, because a lot of us learn that information, we learn that through socialization and all of that we also do it to each other as women, that we, you know, and they use the example of women that choose to stay at home and women who decide to work outside the home and all of that, and how sometimes a woman may be like, well, you know, being at home is not really, you know, like it's not as empowering or whatever, which it is very empowering. Taking care of a home is a lot of work that goes into that, but it just gives me insight. It just made me realize that while we up there fighting for, uh, while we're fighting men in regards to patriarchy, we also have to recognize the shadow part of ourselves. That's the key to this book. That's the point of this book, is to be able to understand that we all have polar opposites, that we all have like a shadow part of us. And the key is to accept both parts of us. We have parts of us that are not identified. And that's a lot of times what we're judging when we're judging people. We're judging a part of us that we have not embraced, that we have not accepted. And we're judging ourselves or judging others for that. And that's what keeps separation in regards to relationships, is because of not being able to see that that person is just reflecting a part of us that we have failed to accept for whatever reason. You know, I'm making this as, I'm simplifying it more than it needs to be, for the nature of, I don't want this video to be too long because it's already at past 16 minutes. But that's one of the main things that I realized in this book, is that a lot of times we are judging ourselves and judging others because we haven't accepted all parts of us. We haven't accepted the part of us that we haven't embraced, or never never, that we don't identify as, based upon our upbringing, based upon belief systems, based upon whatever. So that, reading that chapter on men and women, put things in perspective for me, and it humbled me a little bit too. And remembering that, and then remembering to embrace all parts of me, you know what I'm saying? You know, so that's that. It also talks about relational creature. What? I'm trying to figure out what is relation. I don't know if I wrote that down right. Let me look at this real quick, y'all. Oh yeah, the critic as the relational creature. Let me see if I put a star. I hope I put a star next to it, so because that's a good guide. Versus, did I put a star next to anything? Okay. Let's see. That chapter stood out to me because I have it there. Oh, okay. It talks about what will people think. Yeah, it says, underneath it all, the critic is usually afraid of being unloved, abandoned, and helpless. It wants to ensure that others will approve of you, love you, and be there for you when you need them. Or perhaps the critic is not as interested in affection as it is in power and the admiration of others. It hopes that people will be attracted to you because you are powerful, interesting, or brilliant, and you will never have to worry about being alone and helpless. What will people think is often what your parents asked, either aloud or by implication. They wanted you to be appropriate and to think of the consequences of your actions. This was there for their sakes as well as your own. After all, your behavior directly reflected your parents' performance. It showed whether or not they did a good job in raising you. If you were a good person or a success, you are a credit to them. If you were a bad person or a failure, they will be blamed. So you carry with you not only your own requirements for acceptance, but your parents' feelings too. This is quite a tax for your inner critic. And remember, the inner critic is never satisfied. The inner critic is there to point out things. And the key is to be able to have it as an ally, and to, as they put in this book, dance with it. And this book was very insightful, but I already talked about that, about the what would people think. It just makes me think of a lot of things that I've seen, just observations about that. And I feel like the inner critic, if it's not checked, if it's not balanced, it's like a playground for for environments that requires a lot of law, a lot of rules, a lot of requirements. It's a playground for that. It really is. And it also, it was interesting reading the chapter on growing up in family and how the inner critic impacts you and your family. And it makes me think about how to navigate raising my daughter. And just, it makes me very mindful of that, of making sure that I don't impose that on her like that. I'm just grateful to read books like this because it just makes me real. Not only does it helps me with myself, but in how to support her in being a confident, well-rounded child that's able, who will become an adult, who is able to critically think and also utilize her critic in a way that doesn't beat her up, but is like objective. That's the point of the critic, is to be objective and to point out things for improvement. It's not there to beat you up and abuse you or whatever. So I'm gonna read something that I recently read because I just finished this book. And then I'm gonna close it out because it's already 21 minutes in. The top 12 traits of the inner critic. It constricts your ability to be creative. It stops you from taking risks because it makes you fear failure. It views your life as a series of mistakes waiting to happen. It undermines your courage to change. It compares you unfavorably with others and make you feel less than. It constantly warns you not to look foolish. It is terrified of being shamed and so monitors all your behavior to avoid this. It causes you to suffer from low self-esteem and possibly depression because it tells you that you are not good enough. It can make looking at yourself in a mirror or shopping for clothes miserable because of its ability to create such a negative view of the body. And it does talk about the inner critic in the body too in this book. It can take the fun out of life in its criticisms. It makes self-improvement a compulsive chore because it bases the work on the premise that something is wrong with you. It doesn't allow you to take in the good feelings that other people have towards you. Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. That's another big thing that made me realize that, oh, it's the inner critic that does that. I'm all over the place. It makes you susceptible and often victim to the judgments of other people. Yeah. But when your critic has transformed, it acts as a positive parent who supports you, makes your risk-taking safe, and allows you to be creative and flowing. It is impersonal and does not allow you to worry about what others will think. It helps you to set appropriate boundaries. It is no longer interested in other people's criticisms, so they do not bother you. This helps to free you from the fear of shame or humiliation. Its power gives you greater authority in the world. It brings you the ability to focus clearly. An objective mind, it analyzes events and feelings coolly without making either you or others wrong. Its objective evaluations of situations help you to behave appropriately and with self-discipline. It helps you to get appropriate consultation and advice without making you feel that is a sign of inadequacy. It can direct you to self-improvement or growth or as an adventure rather than a chore because nothing is wrong with you. It does not talk about symptoms or problems. So that's pretty much the basis of the book. And I really like this book. This is a book that I will revisit throughout my life. Yeah, because this is very powerful for me as somebody who identifies as a perfectionist and have been working towards, being more objective to myself, as it says in this book. So that is all for now. And thank you so much for watching this video if you got to this point. And stay tuned for more book reviews. You can follow me on Instagram at Infinitenature1, at Facebook at Infinitenature, at Tumblr at Infinitenature, and at Twitter at Infinitenature1. I believe I said all of them. Instagram and Tumblr. Well, Instagram is at Infinitenature #1. Tumblr is at Infinitenature. Facebook, Infinitenature. And Twitter, Infinitenature #1. Hopefully that makes sense. I will have it in the description if it's not. So stay tuned for more videos from me and have a great day.